Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. Nice to have people here. Welcome to week five of COMP6080. We have hopefully a fun little lecture to go through tonight. So we'll see how that goes. I hope everyone's been well. I can see we've got 17 people in the lecture so far. Hello to all of those who are watching this asynchronously later on. I hope you're doing well. People who don't come to lectures are a whole mix of very normal students doing extremely well, and students doing extremely not so well. What we're going to be going through today is hopefully, again, I know I say this a few times, but it is hopefully a little bit of a lighter lecture today, in the sense that I know that everyone's quite tired. It's that kind of time of term where people are, really hoping for the flex week to appear, because you're only like 3 or 4 days from it, right? And I want to say a big thanks to everyone who have really pushed hard on their, first assignment and now their second assignment as well, because I can see a lot of people in the forum, in the course, who are getting like just really, really stuck in and trying to make it happen. So a big congratulations to those who've been doing that. You will find that it helps you throughout this week and throughout next week. So I applaud those who have gotten stuck into it. Now, the purpose of today's lecture, it's called Async and Assignment 2, Async and Planning. Broadly speaking, what we're actually going to do today is we're actually going to clone the repo. It's another demo lecture, right? Most of our Monday lectures are demo lectures. We're going to clone the repo. We are going to try and register a user by writing some asynchronous code, and we're going to get familiar with that. And then we're going to try and do a little bit of planning for the rest of the assignment. The purpose of today is to help those who are struggling to start and give confidence to those who have gone down a certain path. I get this question all the time too, which is like, people are like, why are we starting it this week instead of last week? The reason for that is, quite honestly, you have all the information you need to start this assignment. There is nothing missing. There is nothing today that I will show you that has not been demonstrated somewhere else. This is more just like a coming in and trying to clean up and consolidate everything for people, if that makes sense. So we have equipped you to date, but it's worthwhile spending the time. And also, just for those who are struggling, some people might be dealing with some personal issues and just haven't even thought about assignment 2. So it's a good little booster for those who are struggling a bit. Now, how the assignment 2 works, if you haven't figured it out already, is that there's a backend, and you can get the backend set up by going into the backend folder. You can npm install, which will install all the dependencies that the backend runs with. And then, that'll take its time, usually depends how fast your computer is. And then you can do npm start, which will actually start the backend up and running on this port. And you've probably seen this before. 95% of you watching know this already. And then here is your backend server with all the different routes and stuff. So that's all well and fine. What we're going to do to start is just to try and actually register our first user. We'll do that together. We'll make a little page and we'll register that user together. So I've already gone and cloned this repo. I did that before the lecture today. And let's explore the front-end folders together. So that's the back-end folder. We don't need to worry about that because we don't need to do anything to the back-end. You can see that for the front-end, we've got a global.css file. Okay, we've got an index.html file, which I can see uses that. Oh, it doesn't. Did I forget to update that? That's so funny. Oh no, okay. No one told me about this, but I guess you all figured it out. There's a global dots. I'm gonna make a note of that. Damn it. Assignment 2 index.html should be global.css. I'm not gonna change that for anyone. Also, you don't really need this global.css file. That's actually just here to, because like a problem is sometimes if we just give you an index.html, students are sometimes like, where do I put stuff? Like, how do I start? So it's kind of good when we give you just a couple of files, so you can kind of go, oh, okay, I see how this works. So you can put this in another folder, but there's a styles folder. I can see my index.html's got some page stuff, some header, nav, bit of code. And then it includes main.js at the bottom here. And when I go to main.js, you can see that it imports two other files, which is my config and my helpers. So I've got config here and helpers. And helpers has just got this function here that helps you turn a file to a data URL. We can have a look at that later. And the config's just the backend port that you use to connect to it. Now, actually, the reason this is really interesting, I mentioned in the very first lecture of 6080 about the whole how Node.js helped really revolutionize web apps, because now suddenly you had applications written in all the same software. So you had servers and client-side code written in the same software. The reason that's actually really interesting is if you actually look at the backend code, you'll actually see that this backend port here is imported from the front-end code. So the backend actually reads that particular number when it starts the server, and therefore when your front-end talks to a server, they're both using the same source of truth. So that's actually just one small example of why this stuff's so helpful, because one place, as opposed to kind of all these other areas where you might have to import a few different, you have to have a source of truth over here and a source of truth over here. So I've got my index.html. Let's actually start that up. So I've got my server running here and I want to keep that running. So now I'm going to go and go into my assignment 2 folder, and I'm now going to go into my front-end folder. Now in this folder here, I don't have to start any Node.js code because these are all static files. There's nothing to do with JavaScript, Node.js, for instance. Sorry, there's nothing to do with Node.js here that matters. These are all just static files that the browser can interpret natively. So to run those, I could just drag and drop those files in, right? That's one potential option. That's something that people might do sometimes, and I can kind of do that here. I'm just going to it on another screen. I can go and grab, for instance, my index.html, and I can just drag that in here, and now I've got my file, and it kind of looks okay. And you can see the file path here is based, the URL is based on a file path. Now that's mostly okay, though. As I mentioned in the forum to a couple of people, you do run into a few obscure issues with that, particularly around CORS, C-O-R-S, which is essentially a security measure. Short answer is most web servers are set up to not, and browsers too, to be honest, is they're set up to not allow random files to talk to servers. They want servers to talk to servers. So what we actually do is, we run I can't remember the command. It's written in the spec. I should just go and copy it. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. There's not one way. Any way works fine. But when I run here, npx frontend on a given port. Now, where I think it gets really confusing, right, is that some people are getting really confused with these ports and stuff. Your backend has a port. Your frontend needs to talk to the backend on that port, but the server that's giving the file system that's providing your front end to the browser is on a different port. So now when I open up here 127.0.0.1/8000, I'll get it can't be found. If I go to index.html, what have I done wrong? I know you'll get this problem. What have I messed up? 8000. Maybe I'm having those issues people have on the forum. I'm in the right folder. So essentially we're just serving, I did this last week, damn it. Maybe that's what people are doing on the forum. Again, if you go read the spec, it tells you very explicitly to run this command inside. I did this last week. For those who are tuning in regularly, I hope you were giggling a little bit. So I've got my file here, great. I can go and update things in my HTML, and all that it's doing, all this little port 8000 server's doing is just serving static files. It's just a static file server. It's not doing any server processing. It's just handing files over via the HTTP protocol. So I can now say, this is my page. And then that will appear there. Okay, great. So, it seems to behave. It does what I want it to. Now, what I now want to do is I want to kind of tackle that register thing. I want to actually have my app be able to register a user by talking to the backend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create like a little register component, and I'm not going to use Bootstrap for anything today. I think we did a little bit of that last week, and I just don't want to spend the time on it. So I'm going to create a div now because I'm kind of hacking away just to get a feel for things. I'm just going to use styles to start, and this div I'm going to give it an ID of say register screen. All right, it's just my register screen. And what am I going to have inside there? Well, I'm going to go consult the API, because what I'm doing here is I'm looking at section 2.1.1 from the lecture. I'm doing 2.1.2, sorry, which is like when the user isn't logged in, the login form shall provide a link button that opens the register form. The register form will contain email, name, password, confirm password, and submit button. Okay, so I go look at the API, takes in email, password, and name. So, you know, the confirm password happens on the front end. All kind of makes sense. So I start putting stuff here like email input type equals text, password, and name. Right, and then I'll have to have another name input too. Okay, email, password, name. I'll just put some BRs here. Again, I really recommend that you kind of start simple with some of this stuff. I also would just give this box like a really tentative 20 pixel margin, 20 pixel padding, and a 1 pixel solid border. That would just help you visually separate it out. So I'm like, okay, there's my little screen. And then at the end, they say an input button. Now for that, I'm just going to use buttons. I think I mentioned I like buttons before because you have a bit more control over them. And that will just say register. And now I've got my little form. Okay, so that's enough to test with. Great. Cool. Very handy. So, because I'm also testing, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go put some placeholder values in these boxes, right? I'm going to do Hayden.Smith. I might make these two windows just different sizes. You know, I put a value in here for testing. So Hayden.Smith at unsw.edu.au. For my password, I'll put in a value of Hayden. Good password. And for name, I'll put in a value of like my name. And then we also need a confirm password. So I'll just, you know, copy that confirm password. Same password. Okay. Okay, so I've like inputted these. Now, obviously password fields should not be type text. They should be type password. That's what gives you those nice little dots. And now I've got a little input field. So now what we want to do is we want to start capturing this information. I wouldn't think too heavily about how to structure your files or how to, you know, because you get people in the forum, should I put all my JavaScript in one file or should I put it in many files? Well, to be honest with you, you're new to this and you're going to approach it a certain way and there's no perfect way to approach it. So just start coding. You'll very quickly start to notice where you are not going in a great direction. You'll start to notice when you are your code's getting messy. So just start somewhere, you know, again, don't overthink it. I've got my main file over here. I know that's imported. And I know what I want to do is I want to have some kind of ID on the button that's like button register. And I know I want to do something when that's clicked. So, you know, I'm going to document.getElementById. I'm going to go and get the button. Going to add my event listener, which is click. And then I'm simply going to console log register. Again, baby steps. You will find your programming is 1,000 times easier if you're always doing things in tiny little steps. We will open up the console. I'll make this window slightly smaller away from my head. We'll open up the console and I will then... oh, it's complaining that I'm on my alert for work file. That's better. I was on my file system one, now I'm on my... There is, you know, the mobile view is honestly just so annoying sometimes. Great. Okay, so I've got that. Now when I hit register, it says register. So that's good. It's behaving as I expect. I'm getting some kind of response. What we obviously want to do there is capture the information. So now I have to go and give some IDs to these inputs. Right? I'm going to go and... How many spaces we got? Doesn't matter. Yeah, I'm going to go and give some IDs to these inputs. So I've got my confirm password, my name, and my other password. This is not how I'd indent stuff. I'm just doing this for the lecture screen. So this one will be like, register email. This one here might be register password. Do another one, register password, confirm. And then the last one, register name. Okay, now we're going to go capture those three things. So, we want to capture those in oh, shit. Nah, it's fine. We want to capture all of those. Now, I kind of get this question a lot sometimes. Some people are like, oh, I have this idea. Why don't I I know, I'm going to go and abstract away the document object. So const d equals document. Great, now I can write d.getElementById. by ID. So you might be thinking that that's quite smart. I don't want to call it not smart, but what I would ask people to consider, because JavaScript's very tempting to go and clean up, because it's very dirty. Raw JavaScript's not very pretty. Whilst this reduces the amount of characters you have to read on a given line, the trade-off of this kind of approach is that now you have introduced a new semantic for someone to try and understand. So if you're someone who comes into this code and you see document.getElementById, if you're a competent JavaScript programmer, you see that and you think, that makes sense. I've seen that. I get it. Sure. If you see something like d.id, and you've abstracted all of these, whilst it might make the lines cleaner, it's cleaner to you as someone who's familiar with the semantic is the meaning of words. So when I say semantic, it's like characters, document has a semantic, it has a meaning behind it. So in some ways, just be careful of that. So I've got my 4 inputs here. I would like to perhaps go and, const that equals document.getElementById that dot value, because they've all got a value. Right? I got email password, confirm. 4 things like that. And now let's check that the inputs are the same. So, I'll check is register password equal to register password confirm? Or more specifically, is it not equal to that? And if it's not equal to that, I meant to show an error pop up, but I'll just use an alert here. Passwords don't match. Right? And I'll do an early return. So now it's like, if I try and run this page and I enter a different password, I'm going to get, passwords don't match. But if they do match, it's all good, and I'll get the console log here. But now we actually want to make the API call. So I go to the API docs. I can see here that the request body is like this, so I can actually go and get that ready in advance. I can say, request body equals a dictionary of email, register email, and then I got password and name as well, right? So register password, register name, like this. There's my little request body. All good. So now I'm going to check, am I able to get that correct? So I've got, okay, there's my register, my request body. I click register. Okay, I've sent that off. Now I actually have to make the API call. So we don't have this for you in the code, but if you've gone and watched the fetch lecture, you know that if you just Google fetch API, you will find information about how to do a fetch on the MDN website. I don't think the MDN website's the nicest place to read about a fetch, because it's very MDN is very formal, it's very technical. It's great when you're looking for some theoretical information, but things like W3 schools will often be a little bit nicer for the simple end. The problem with W3 schools is that you're going to get an oversimplified answer as well. This is great, but it's really simple too. It's really, really simple. And it's missing some details you might want. So again, I'm just showing you how I would go about looking for information like this. You could start with one of the ones that are on these helper sites like this, though you might just find that the information is not missing. So the information is not there. So if you completely forget how to do a fetch, go find a nice simple website until you run into a problem. If you remember the fetch from the lecture, then go have a look at the fetch API from MDN, because you will eventually find all of the information you're looking for, such as the parameters, right? So the fetch function here, right? Const fetch response promise. I'm going to just copy that. Equals fetch, and then it wants a resource and some other stuff. What you can see is that the first thing it wants is a resource, and then it wants some kind of, it says init. And what resource is resource is URL. So resource is like, you know, HTTP localhost 5005, or if we're being good people, it's, you know, backend port, but we need the nice string brackets. So there's our resource we're contacting, but we're not just contacting the server, we're contacting a particular part of the server, right? Which is /auth/register. Okay? But then if I go look at the rest of the fetch API, you can see init is an object. So const init is an object that containing custom settings, including method. Now we want to set the method to be post. The default method is get, but you can see here that post, you know, auth register is a post. So we're going to have to call that. Then there are some headers and some other things, and then a body. But you know, let's pass the body into. Okay, the body is anything you want in your request. What do we want to send it? We want to send it the request body. Now this isn't perfect. There's some issues here, but let's just try this. Let's try this out. So now I want to register the request body, and then I'm going to capture the response, and I'm going to try and print the response like this. So, you know, register response. Let's try this out. Register. Okay. It says response promise pending. Now, remember, if from the promises lecture, which I think I did this time. Did I do that one this year? I think I did that one new this time around. From the responses lecture, when we get a promise, remember, a promise is a promise. It's saying that I will execute this and I will keep going. I'm going to execute it, and here's the object that you can use to reference when I'm done. So this here is kind of like tracking something that was promised to be executed. So when we want to get the result of it, we do fetch response promise dot then, and then we capture the info into a function, right? So what actually often happens here is that you pass it a function that captures that information, and then we will console log info is info. Now remember, the order of execution is going to go register, response, and then the console log, because this console log doesn't happen until this promise resolves, and once this promise resolves, the dot then can be called, which will give us that info. So now I go and refresh my page, I click register, I get bad request. That's not good. Okay. I see info is response, and I have all this type of random stuff here. You know, type cause, URL, all of this. And this one's a little bit obscure to figure out, but you can see it if you look on some like W3 school sites. And the kind of what's going on here is that when you get a response object, which is the resolution of a promise, it's not actually, the content of the response is not very readable. So you actually have to go and capture it by saying, actually, you know what? The body of the response, or response body, is actually, if I change this from info to response, it's actually response.text. So like the body of the return, the information that's given back, is actually this response body, which is the responses.text. Now when I go and run this, you see that the response body itself is a promise. So you think, oh, okay, well, I need to do now response body dot then. Hopefully that's, you know, body. And then I'll console log body is, and then body, like that. Try again. Okay, so, you know, register, yep, with the body. Response, which is a promise, yep. Response body is another promise, and then body here is error email already registered. So what's gone wrong here is that well, not what's gone wrong, but what's happened is this body's responded to me with JSON. Now that makes sense because everything on this web server appears to be responding with JSON. So what actually happens is rather than taking that response body and then JSON.parsing it, which turns it into like a nice little JavaScript object like this, they did add a JSON promise to the fetch library whereby it will actually get the text from the body and then parse it to JSON as well. So you get something like this. Now, so let's clean this up a little bit, because we've clearly got this response here. How you would typically write this is typically you wouldn't go and capture the promise in a separate variable. You would simply write fetch, and then at the end of the fetch you would write .then. Which makes sense. Fetch is a promise. So if you want to do something with it, you can't capture the variable, you have to .then it. So this still works. And then very similarly in here, you would say response.json, and then you would also .then that. And I can get rid of these unnecessary console logs that we don't use anymore. So, you know, this starts to get a little bit cleaner now. Now it's kind of like, all right, well, there's the body of the response. But then also, remember that the way we can actually chain promises, which is the example you saw in W3 schools, whereby instead of having this kind of nested promise, or like promise hell, callback hell, we can actually say, well, what we would actually like here is that for the fetch, we'll have a .then, and that .then is going to take the response, and it's just going to return response.json. And then after that, we're going to take that particular item here. So I just maybe want to really quickly copy that before I move it across. I know this was covered in the promises lecture, but I think this kind of understanding of chaining promises is pretty important, and it will make your life a little bit easier. So just so we can compare these two a little bit more literally. So that is, like, the bottom one there is probably how you would deal with this. And this is chaining promises. And the idea of chaining promises is that your first fetch returns a promise, which you capture as a response object. That's the resolution. That's the data associated with the resolution of your promise. You then return another promise, because response.json is a promise. When your .then function returns a promise, you can go and .then it again to get the result of that next promise, which in this case is the body. If this doesn't make sense to you, if this is confusing, then what you're grappling with, most likely, not all of you, but what you're grappling with most likely if this is confusing is that this is one of the first instances of, generally speaking, like for many of you, this course will be one of the first times you've dealt with event-driven programming. Is in programming that is not, you know, totally linear, imperative, sequential, and, you know, stuff that's not OOP. The idea of you kind of jumping around callbacks. If callbacks are a new idea to you, then promises are also going to be challenging. Even if callbacks aren't new, promises are a new idea. Generally, what I'd say is if you just keep doing it and keep trying things out, it will eventually make sense to you in a way that matters to you. Don't stress yourself out too much. For many of you, you won't really feel that comfortable with this until probably toward the end of the assignment when you've done at least half of it. So I've now fetched my URL, and you know what? I might just go and put this right in here. Great, cool. And then I got my objects there too. So whilst I'm being a good programmer here, and whilst we're just kind of having a little bit of fun, what I want to do is I want to maybe generalize this, because, you know, being the hopefully good little programmer I am, I noticed that, we'll do that after actually, we'll do that after, where it'll make more sense once we do another call. So I got my register thing there, okay, I register, email address is already registered. If I change this to haydensmith1 and I register, it says email address is already registered. That's strange, wonder why that is. Email address is already registered. Sounds a little bit suspect to me. I don't really know why that is. Let me try and print out the request body, because I swear that's strange. I haven't signed up with Hayden Smith 3. Okay. So we are sending that. Wonder what's going wrong here. So this might be you. This might be you in a situation and you think, oh, darn, this doesn't make any sense. So, you know, you go to post on the forum and, you know, you're like, nothing is working. But I'll show you what to do. So Tanit's asked a really good question. Says, would you suggest that we go from learning callback to promises to async await? So async await is a really powerful syntax improvement to promises. The problem is quite simple as far as I'm concerned. You know, in JavaScript, you have the idea, you have the idea of promises. Promises were an elegant way. They didn't exist when I started learning JavaScript. They're an elegant way of dealing with nested callbacks in a nearly linearized fashion. Async await is a great way to deal with promises, these circles are not to scale, but async await is a subset of this. So to kind of all those people who maybe want to jump onto the async await thing and just like stick to it, the problem is that it just doesn't work all the time. You know, in my own day-to-day experience, like coding, I can use async await to bypass all the ickiness of promises 90% of the time, right? That other 10%, you can't. You can't avoid it. And the stuff you can't avoid is sometimes some of the most complicated stuff. You can't do true concurrent programming in JavaScript without understanding promises and promise.all. You can't, as I mentioned in a forum post once, you can't do asynchronicity on things like getter methods for classes. There's kind of this long list of stuff. So the point is that this is not like a next step, right? Like in JavaScript, you know, const and let were natural expansions of var, and you don't need to understand var anymore if you're writing new code. Promises you do. They're kind of still everywhere. Anyway, to your question though, would you suggest we go from learning callbacks to promises to async in that order? I mean, yeah, probably. Realistically, you're going to oscillate between those, but callbacks are an aspect of event-driven programming. Promises were a way to deal with nested callbacks in a nicer way, because this is essentially what would have normally been two callbacks, where it's like kind of a chain of linear steps that are asynchronous. And then async await is just something we'll learn and apply in assignment 3, which just cleans up the standard case of the use of promises, because most of the time promises are used, really, to make asynchronous fetches and asynchronous database calls. They're like two of the most common reasons you use it. And most of the time, you want them to be synchronous. You want them to be step by step, not deal with things concurrently. So, yeah. Now back to the code. It's like register's not working. If something's wrong, take a step back and realize that we've given you the entire backend. And you can actually go and inspect what's going on in the backend anytime by going and clicking on database.json in the backend. And I go to database.json in the backend. Now, whilst we don't expect you to understand this, and I don't expect any of you to understand it, what I'm telling you is that you will find clues for things by looking here, which you might get answers for quicker than going to a help session or waiting for someone. I can reset the backend anytime by ending the server, writing npm run reset, which will reset the database, and then I'm going to run the server again, and there's my server. So what I want to show you here is, watch what happens when I register Hayden.Smith. Pay attention to the server. I click register. I click on my editor, and you'll see that a new user appeared. What do you notice about this new user? It doesn't have an email, a name, or a password. Immediately what that tells me, well, I don't want to make it sound like it's obvious, but like immediately you can see that something weird is happening. Now, if this is populating it with no data, what this would indicate is that the server's somehow not getting the data. So what you could do is, again, go back, look at some other examples in lectures, look at some other examples in shoots, or this or that, or play around with the backend if you want to, right? This is like, have you ever seen that meme that's like 6 hours of debugging saves 5 minutes of reading documentation? If anyone's ever seen that. Anyway, it's funny. The problems here, and getting started is the hardest part. Does anyone want to tell me, actually, before we jump on it? Yeah, so Mitchell's pointed out my email isn't being added. Does someone know what I'm doing wrong here? It's a mistake we'll see students make sometimes, which is a very fair mistake. It's why I'm going through it now, because I think it's one of the easiest things to kind of get tripped up on, because it relies on a little bit of understanding of HTTP, which isn't really like baked in to any particular course in CSE. So I'll just see if anyone has any particular ideas. Whilst I'm waiting on that, Logan says, what's the difference between promises and continuation? I'm not too sure what you mean by continuation there, if you wanted to elaborate. And then Reese says, do we need to stick to async await in assignment 3, or can we stick to callbacks promises? You can do whatever you want for assignment 3. It's up to you. We only constrain in assignment 2 because we feel it's important that you hit that learning outcome on promises. So a couple of things you need to be wary of. One of the first ones is that when you're dealing with JSON, when you're sending information to servers with JSON, you need to be... You can see here that the request body that's being sent is application/JSON. If I go back to my page here and I go to the network tab in the editor and I go to... Where is it? I'll click register. There's my register request. I can actually see things about this request here. For instance, okay, so I can see that it has captured it as application/J. Oh, that's my response header. But my request header, I can't see anything there about application/JSON. So you can see that my response has actually got the header because that's what the server sent back. But we should make sure that we are actually sending the right content type. So I can see that as part of the fetch API, the init object also takes a header parameter, which is an object that will contain content type application/JSON like that. Okay. And now we'll try this instead. So now I try and hit register. Oh, I got an error. Sorry. There's a little console log down here that was the hint of what I was doing wrong. So now I click register. Oops, wrong screen. Register. Okay, I got another 400. Okay, well that's weird. I thought I was passing that in right. You know, is the capitalize? I'm trying to take you on a journey here, right? Is the capitalization right? Is the capitalization wrong? Okay, I'm still getting that error. Okay, maybe it's not that. I don't know. Another thing you have to be wary of, and this will be different with every API you do, right? Like this initial dance of sending and receiving data is usually the hardest part about working with a service. It's usually getting the right information sent and then also doing the authorization, which we'll try and tackle next. So next thing I'm going to try is I'm like, oh, well, you know what? The server actually expected that I send it a whole bunch of JSON, but when I look here, have a look at this. I go to my request payload and I can see that my payload is object. Okay, and that makes sense because HTTP, everything is sent as a string. It's just how the internet works, right? Like they can't send JavaScript over the internet. They just send strings. That's why we use JSON. So part of the problem here is then, okay, well, my body needs to be turned into JSON. It can't just be sent as an object, right? It just can't be sent as an object. So now I send that, I click on that. Oh, there's my payload. That's a good sign. I'm still getting a 400 error, which is pretty strange. Maybe I'll go back to my database.json. Okay, I can't quite see that there. I can't see my, Hayden.Smith at UNSW, so that's quite strange. Not too sure what's going wrong there. Now a 400 error, if you look up HTTP status code, right? A 400 error, bad request error. What 400 means, four XX errors are that you've done something wrong, you as the user, not the server. And that's saying the server's rejecting that information. So that information that I'm sending the server, it's like, that's not good enough. So it's unhappy, and that's why it said email address is already registered. Now again, the fact that we've got this blank email address in here is a bit of an indicator that the information we're trying to send is really just not getting there, right? So it's kind of strange because we're at this point. I look at register. Okay, I see my headers. I got my payload. Preview of the response. That's what I get back. That's my response. Not 100% sure what's going wrong here. Does anyone have any ideas? Williams asked a question. With fetch, I know content type is required, but I've seen contradicting sources that say I need to accept in the header as well. The accept header, I'm not too across that specifically, particularly for requests. I'm not too sure on that particular answer, I'll be honest. Often you'll see this a lot where someone will say you need something and in theory you need it, but often like people who write web browsers and stuff will just kind of hard code in people missing stuff. I know in some instances, for instance, if you send JSON in the body, you don't need to add the header either. Like the browser just kind of figures it out. It's like, oh, okay, you're kind of just sending a lot of JSON, so I assume that it's JSON. Now, why I wanted to take you down this rabbit hole here is because, like, I want you to start. One thing I'm trying to do differently in this iteration of the course is, whilst we tell you that you don't have to modify the backend, I want to show you that we give you everything so that nothing's a black box. So in the backend here, I've got black box source server, and there's actually this file called server.js that you can go and look through anytime you want, and you can actually look at the code in here, and you can actually see this is an express server, which is something we wrote in week 3, just a really little one. And you can actually see here is the auth register capture. And you can see here that I'm capturing the email, password, and name from the body. So I might now go and console log, email, password, name, and then I'll also console log request.body. Don't be afraid to update the backend if you want to. Like, just don't change any of the functionality, but you can go and do this. So now, for instance, and I'm not saying you have to, I'm just showing you can do these things. I go and run the backend. I will go and refresh my page. I will click register, and you'll see it's undefined, undefined, undefined. So I know that information is not even getting the body is empty of what I'm sending. Now, Sunny in the chat has pointed out that what I have written here in my main is I've written header as the parameter instead of headers. Okay, so that was a clear mistake. So now I'm going to click on that, refresh my page again. I'll open this up just for fun. I click register. There's all the information, right? That's what it was. It was just a single character was done wrong. That's a mistake I see on the forum too. So thank you, Sunny. You can see that information is now in the backend, and when I go to my database.json, you can see that hayden.smith at UNSW is now there too. Obviously, my text editor is refreshing this file. You might have to refresh it yourself. You get the point. But what went wrong there was that whilst I was sending JSON, the browser was not aware, like it was not receiving JSON correctly in this case. There's a little bit of background there to do with, I'm pretty sure the server is looking for JSON, and if it can't find the header, it's not going to look at the body and some other things. But anyway, if I try and register that again, I get an error. So now that we know I've actually registered a user, what I can do is I can start dealing with that error. So I can start saying, you know what? Well, if body.error exists, then I'm just going to do an alert. And that alert's just going to be body.error. Else I'm going to, deal with it. Now, again, you probably have to deal with the alert a little bit more elegantly. But if I register this now, it says email address is already registered. If I change it to Hayden Smith 2, Hayden Smith 2 at UNSW, and I register that, it says, great, done. And it actually says here, it gives me the response back, which is token, and then a user ID. So that token is essentially the information that we need in order to get more information, right? And what's some information you might want to get? Well, some really simple information that we could try and get together is if I scroll further down here and I've got my users, I can get the details of a specific user. In fact, I could just get the details of myself here, right? So maybe let's try and do that. So what I want to do is let's wrap all of this. I mean, all of this here was a listener. What I should really be doing is I should probably be taking this whole thing here and like, okay, what would I do here, right? I would probably take the logic part of this and separate it into a separate function. So I create a function called register that would take in an email, a password, and a name. And it would be pretty much just concerned with the logic of actually sending the request. So it would be like this stuff, basically. right? It would be like that stuff. And then I could just, get rid of this because it's straight in from the parameters. And then I would simply, at the end of that, I would just call register with register email, register password, and register name, like that. Because now what I've done is I've separated what you would call your UI layer here, which is interacting with the DOM, collecting elements, maybe a bit of validation. To be honest, you might even put the this little check inside the register function. I'm separating that out from my what you would call business logic, which is the actual dealing with the requests and stuff that's not tied to the UI specifically. I know you've got an alert here and a console log, which are a bit more to do with the UI. It's not perfect, but I'm just trying to demonstrate a point. Yep, great. So after I register, what I would like to do now is I would like to try and get the user information. But you know what? That's the register screen. I also need a login screen because I can't just keep registering every time I want to test something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have two nav items. One's going to be called register and the other's going to be called login. And then inside my register screen here, I'm going to go put an h1 tag that's like register, like that. Okay. Register. And what I'd like to do is create a login screen for myself. Like this, login. Okay, and login's just email and password, so I can get rid of some of these details. And I can go and change all the register words here from register to input, login, sorry. Login email, login password, login screen and stuff. Now, by default, when the app loads, I only want to show the register screen, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do display none here. I'll go clean up all this CSS later, right? Maybe I don't even want this. Maybe I bin it. There's no point perfecting my CSS if I'm just going to bin something. So I've got my register there. And what I need to do now is have this page toggle. So just a really quick revision for those who've forgotten. I'm going to say, give this li an ID like nav register, and I'll give this li an ID such as nav login. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go bind some events that will help me toggle and hide the register and login screen. So just really quickly down the bottom here, document.getElementById, nav register, if I can spell it correctly, .add event listener, click, and it will simply go and get my... To be consistent, I should probably call this like screen register, to be honest, because that would make more consistent sense. Screen register. So I go and get element by ID screen register. I'll go and set its style, its display style to block, and I'll go and set the login one to none, which hides it. And when someone clicks a login, I'm going to do the exact opposite. So when someone clicks login, I'm going to set login to be displayed and register to none. And now immediately I should have a toggle here, like that. Okay, cool. So now I got my login. The problem is though that login, nothing happens with login. We had our button register before, but I kind of need to do something on button login. So when button login's clicked, well, okay, I want to capture the, the email and the password, and you know what? I don't need to check if they match, and then I'm just going to call the login function where I just give it the email and password, and I can change these variables to make more sense too. Just call it login password. And now you know what? I'm just going to go and copy my entire register function and cut out all the name parts, right? So I get rid of the name, I get rid of that. I can see that most of the stuff's the same except I'm calling auth login now, and the function's going to be called login. Right? Okay. So I click on login, and then I'll open up my console so I can read some stuff. Then I click this, and I got a token, right? So just literally, I know I'm obviously going to be faster at this than most of you because I do it more often. I'm not trying to be like, oh, that only took 2 minutes, but you can appreciate that, once the basics come in, it's quite easy to just start moving and expanding from that. One thing you'll notice here, this is what I wanted to touch on before, we'll probably run about 10 or so, 15 minutes past the hour, and we'll spend all the time afterwards doing some planning, is there's a lot of repetition in these two functions. So what I want to do now is I'm going to make a function called API call. Cool. And what is this function going to take in? Well, what is different about my two requests here? Everything was the same except the path, like as in the fetch path, the auth register, auth login. The body was different, and I think that was it, right? So now let's go and copy this. Oh my god, look at all those tabs and spaces being mixed up. This is terrible. So now I've got my request body, but that's just going to be body now, because we're taking that in as the function. And then I'm going to change this, instead of auth register, to be path. Like that. Okay, most of the rest looks fine. So now hopefully if I've done this right, my register function can just call API call with auth register and this request body. Like that. And then the same kind of thing here, I can just call API call with auth login and request body. I'm just trying to what I'm trying to demonstrate here is how you can essentially, as you go, learn the patterns and then just start to clean it up. So I can see when I register, I get a 400. That makes sense. When I log in with that email, I get my token. So this is all behaving for me here. I can go and clean this up further. I can just say, well, you know what, the request body, it's just straight in there. That's that whole thing, and exact same thing here. In fact, this code eventually gets simple enough that, well, that's it, right? It's like, okay, done. To tie off this example, well, we said we do a couple more things, and one of the other things is like we really should show some kind of logged in screen that a user sees like when they're logged in, because that's kind of the logical step. You log in and then you see something. Now I'm going to hide this screen too by default, and there's no nav menu for it because you don't click on the login screen or the dashboard or something. But what I do want to say here is, once someone does successfully log in, I want to, if there's a body, I want to, go to the, I don't know what you'd say, go to welcome, go to screen welcome, like that. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to make a function called go to screen welcome. And it's quite literally just going to hide both screen login and screen register and show screen welcome. So screen welcome now is the block, and register and login are not. And then just to make things, pretty stable, I'm then going to, on the other function calls, hide the welcome screen too. Like that. Okay, so I register, okay, can't do that. Login. Okay, I'm getting this error, cannot read properties, null of style. It's complaining because I forgot to actually update the div screen welcome here. Forgot to update that. Okay, so same thing, I go to register, I go to login, click that. It says welcome, cool. I refresh the page, I'm logged out. That's normal. Your single page app is like it resets every time you refresh the page. You can obviously fix that some different ways, but that's how we expect it to be. We don't expect it to... You'll probably want to store some tokens in local storage or hard-code a token for debugging, but in terms of when your stuff's tested, it doesn't have to stay logged in. So I've got that working. For a little bit of cleanliness here too, I would probably go and grab this function, rip it out and call this one const go to screen login, so I can reuse this later. Right? And then it's just that my nav login simply calls my go to screen login, like this. And then I do the exact same thing for my register. So my register is just calling go to screen register. And then I've just got like a nice function here, go to screen register. So, you know, just tidying things up as you go. You can probably abstract some of these things further. I already screwed this up because it doesn't like the definition order, I think that's what that is. Yeah. Okay, so now I've logged in. Okay. Well, what do we know about when we made the API call? The body returned a token. We want to store that token. So I'm going to store that. I'm going to say, you know, body.token. That's what I want. I want that token. So I log in, I get that token. Now this is an example of where you probably would use a global variable. I would probably have some variable called, you know, auth token. Terrible auth token. And that might be, say, null to start. And when someone actually successfully registers or logs in, I set auth token to be body.token, like this, right? So now I've got this like auth token that exists, and I will need that to actually make my subsequent API calls, because what do we know about, like, once we get to the welcome screen, when the welcome screen's shown, we actually probably want to make an API call, right? I'll just console log this. It's like load the user. Now, obviously, you're not going to load user information on the welcome screen, but you get the point. I'm just trying to demonstrate the principles today. Load the user. So here we know we want to load the user. So we're going to make one last asynchronous API call before we take a break, which is this one here. It is the get user info. I have two functions up here called login and register. I'm going to make another one. In fact, I'm actually also going to store like the auth user ID too here. Like that. I'm going to create another function called load, or like, you know, get my profile or something. We're going to call the /user with information about me. I want to get my own profile information. Now, all that function probably needs is the user ID. In fact, well, I should just call it get profile, to be honest. You know, get profile takes in a user ID. Again, let's keep it simple. Console log user ID. Okay. And when someone goes to the welcome screen, we want them to, we want to call get profile with auth user ID. Now, the reason I say auth user ID is because that's the ID associated with my account when I logged in, which for Hayden.Smith is 81519. So I'm trying to get the profile information of me. So now when I go to log in, I click register. I get 81519. Great. So I know that my get profile is working. To get the information, I want to make an API call. Here is where our abstraction starts to break down. The problem is this API call is for user. The problem here, a couple of problems. First one is that this request is a get request, not a post request. So now I have to go and like, you know, restructure this and take out my, you know, method here and put it up here, you know, methods there. And now I come down here and I say, okay, well, that's a post. And then I come down here and I say, that's a post. And now my user one's going to be a get. I can also see that there are two parameters that are given here. The first one is a header, and the second one is a params. And I think, okay, this is starting to get a little bit ugly now. Well, I'm already passing headers here. Though for params, I don't need to worry much, because with post and put and delete requests, we are sending information through the body. With get requests, we are sending information through the URL, which is a little bit weird, but how we actually send this information is like this. User ID equals user ID. So it all comes through the URL for get requests. That's how the HTTP standard works. That's not a decision of mine. Don't be mad at me. And you know what? It actually doesn't even have a body. You can see this request doesn't actually send anything in the body. So I can send an empty object here. It's just an empty object. Now, I'm not going to console log user ID here because I just want to see what the body responds with. So let's just start that out. So let's try and send that. Now, if we try and send that as it is, the problem we're going to run into is that we have not sent the auth token correctly. Oh, we've sent a body by accident. Oh, okay, sure. So now what's happening is even though we passed an empty object into our function, our JSON.stringify still tried to send it, tried to JSONify it, and then send it. So we actually need to say here is, you know what, if method is get, then send nothing, otherwise send the body. So we can try like that. So I go to my login, I click register, invalid token. So this is what we expect because we didn't send the token to authorize us. Because remember, when we're asking for information from the server, we need to send it some information so that it knows that it's us and not some random on the internet. So I need to pass the token through as a header. Okay, and I think, oh, okay, I need to update this once again. This is also a good reason why sometimes it's worthwhile not over abstracting things in the early days when you're not familiar with code. Like if you just waited until you'd done like a third copy and paste of that fetch, some of these discrepancies would be a bit more obvious. So, okay, now I need to pass in headers too. How do we pass in headers? Well, if you want to be really sneaky in this assignment, you could probably figure out the fact that every request except for auth register and auth login doesn't send a header, doesn't send the authorization token, and everything that does send it. So if I was trying to be really sneaky, here I would just add like a, this is horrible to do, but I would add like authorization here is, if the path is auth register or the path is auth login, then put nothing there, otherwise put the auth token. And that auth token has come from the global variable up here. I have no idea if this works. I've never tried to do this before. Invalid user ID. That's interesting. What this tells me, you can see the request is a 400 response now. 403 is bad permissions, like forbidden. So that means that my token did work. It was sent, it was just pulled from the global variable. However, it was a bad user ID. And the reason for that, just to save time, is that I did not do this I was using a lowercase I instead of an uppercase I. And the example code, the Swagger docs clearly says an uppercase I. So now when I go log in and I click register, why do I get invalid token? It's really weird. Oh, okay, user ID is undefined. So now it's complaining that, okay, I'm actually confused this time. Oh, this one's quite obscure, I think. I think there's some strange recursive behavior going on here, right? Do this quickly, then we'll take a break because I'm sure some of you want it. Part of the problem of what's gone wrong here is that in our attempts to abstract this, we have generalized our success case. And this is actually an example of where you might use a callback. Okay. So here, I've got this like response that I normally do something with, but this only really works for register and login. It doesn't work for my /user one. So what we would actually do here with this API call is instead of like doing something with the response, we would actually do a callback here. And we would do the callback by giving our API call a callback function, for instance. This is just one way of doing it. So now what happens is that I give my API callback 1 argument, 2 argument, 3 argument, and then I give it a 4th one, and that 4th one is a callback, which means it's a function, and that function is going to do this. However, that callback needs that body information. Right? It needs that body information like this. So that's how you do it. So what it is, the 4th argument here is the body. Sorry, the fourth argument is a function that takes in that body. So we're going to do that for auth register, and then we'll do the exact same thing for auth login. But for get profile, we want to do something else, and for that, I'm just going to console log it to start. So now we'll just say console log / user body is, body, like that. So now I come back here, I log in, I click register. Body is not defined. Body. Oops. My bad. Log in. It all worked. What was going wrong there? There was some weird recursive stuff going on. It was very strange. But what you can see is now we've generalized it properly. Now we're actually, so what's happened, we call login, that returns, great, and then after that we call get profile with auth user ID. Yep. Which calls this, and then we console log the output, which gives us all of my email and my name and who I'm watching and my ID and my jobs. And if we wanted to, we could go and update the HTML with that. In fact, just for completeness, I'm just going to add a div here called welcome or like user JSON, and let's just dump the information there as like a raw JSON. So here I'll just say document.getElement by ID. User JSON dot inner text equals JSON.stringify the body. So when we log in, we'll just dump all that information out. This is not how you would do the app per se, but okay. I've done something wrong there. Inner text. We've proven that we can talk to servers. The very, very last thing to do before the break, and I just want to show you this, is how you can actually use promises yourself to be even more effective. And what I mean by that is rather than your API call function simply using a fetch and having a callback, you can actually use promises. You can actually make your own promise here. This might be a bit, if this is too much for you, that's okay. I don't expect you all to be like, I'm going to use my own promise, but you can actually get rid of the need for a callback here, because you need that callback unless you use promises, because you need a way to kind of action something once your API call is done. We got away with it with the register and the login because we just kind of assumed that once you'd logged in or registered that we were going to do something else. But like, that's not true. Watch what happens when I like fail to log in. I'm pretty sure it just changes this. No, it doesn't. It stops that anyway. And the way I can do this is I can say, you know what? My API call function is actually going to return a new promise that has a resolve and reject. What I just wrote out there is the same code. It's like baked into my brain. And I'm going to go and take my entire body here and put it inside. And now, instead of my callback, I'm just going to resolve with the body. So instead of callback body, I do resolve body. And what this allows me to do now is instead of saying API call, all of this stuff and then giving it a callback, I can just very slightly modify my code to use the .then. Because now instead of it just kind of being this function that returns nothing, it's now a function that returns a promise, and that promise acts like gives me the resolved information, and it's the same thing here. So my API call .then body. So I think this should work. Okay, that was a bit hopeful with that one. Can you see my screen's done the night mode thing where it all turns like kind of red, so my face is getting red. Okay, so this is really good, really simple, and it also means that I can start separating out some business logic too, because when you think about it here, this go to welcome screen and some of that other information shouldn't even be part of this like login here. It should actually be part of like if you're calling like the button login, we collect the login, you collect the password. This go to screen welcome here, it really should not be part of the API call, because the API call is concerned with talking to a server and getting data. This go to welcome screen here should really be down here, and you should be able to use a promise like this by saying, well, All right, well, when you're done with that, please just go to the welcome screen, you know? And again, you could actually wrap this in a promise too if you wanted. You could say return new promise, resolve, reject. And you could just do that, and you could just resolve with nothing because there's no information at the end, right? And now you've turned your login into a promise. So you can deal with it like that. Realistically, what I imagine you would probably do here, to be perfectly honest, is that you would realize that a lot of this stuff you don't need to deal with in these functions, and what you would actually do is instead here you would just return API call. Because remember, API call actually returns you a promise. Like, that's what the API call function does. It returns a promise. So now I can just return that API call, and where I call that API is where I will actually go and do my like logic here. So now it's kind of like it's like up to the, so I call login, which then gives me back the body, and then I go and set my two global variables and set my screen to be welcome, and then I go do the same thing for register, because register should, you know, return API call, and it has a dot then too, right? So I call dot register, you know, register dot then, perfect, and then I've got my profile one too, which instead of my dot then being there, I can just return that, which again keeps that logic there, and then on my at the end of my get profile, I just do a dot then, and again now we're starting to help separate these pieces of logic out. Okay, right? I hope this is helpful. Like I try really. This is one of like the lectures I think about the most in the course because there's a lot of elements here, and there's all these little tidbits we haven't talked about. But if you can do this, you can do the whole assignment, really. Like, you know, 85% of it or whatever, without all the extra bonus marks and some of the other obscure things. Because it's just, if you can work with asynchronous code and you can manipulate the DOM, you can do everything. You can do 85% of stuff, you know, very easily. So, yeah. Cool. Okay. Just had a quick break. So what I'm going to do quickly before we wrap up and give you all your evenings back is I just want to very briefly talk about kind of planning a UI, because I think it's an area where many of you probably have never had to kind of make an interface before. Just before we get into that, a quick reminder that for all the promise stuff that was just gone through and all the whatever, as I said to the live students when I was on pause, it's very dense, and when I'm moving through this quickly, don't think it means that you should all just like get it immediately. There's a lot of stuff here that will take a while to get through, and like I'll be perfectly honest, you know, I don't think promises are fundamentally difficult, but I think they take time to understand and get used to, and you know, I can tell you with confidence that I understand them twice as good as when I first even taught this course, as in ran this course, and I'm sure I'll be saying that in a year or two again. So there is no suddenly you understand everything. You'll just continue to understand more and more over time. So anyway, when I look at an app like this and I want to try and understand it and think about how to plan it, typically what I would do, you can use a whole bunch of different tools like for this or whatever you want. One of my favorite online tools, if you don't want to pay for stuff, is app.diagrams.net. It's a great little, sorry. Yeah, it's a great little tool where you can just go and far out. One sec. Stupid thing. It's a great tool, stupid thing. I like this tool because it's free. I feel like this used to be, I don't know if this used to be done by Google or if it just used to have really similar things, but it's kind of like got a 2015 Google UI to it. So what I would do is I would go through the spec and I would kind of systematically essentially draw out different screens. Okay, now you know that your application is going to be made up of a bunch of different screens, and we've kind of seen them already. I'd be like, all right, well, I'm going to have a register screen, Yep, and I'm going to go and have a login screen. And this stuff's just really good even just to visualize it. I mean, this is not going to be groundbreaking what I'm going to do for the next 5 minutes. I'm going to show you how to draw boxes. I know I've got an error pop up. Okay, maybe I'll put that in like the modal category, right? So like these can be like screens up here, and that could be a modal, whatever the hell that means. I've got my feed. Okay. So yep, now I've got my feed. Advanced feed, which says show likes and comments on a job, liking a job. That doesn't have much to do with like a screen because it's all on the screen, you know, same screen. Pagination on a feed, and then I've got, oh, okay, viewing others' profiles. So now it's like, all right, well, I've got a profile, viewing my own profile, same thing, updating a profile. Users can update their own personal profile. You think, oh, well, that could all be part of the same screen, I guess, if I want to. Watching and unwatching, that's all kind of part of the profile screen, like just buttons on the profile screen. Adding a job, okay, maybe I want that to be a modal or something, you know, nice little pop-up. So I'll just add that down here, like, you know, add job. Updating and deleting a job, I don't really need any, you know, you just picture this in your head. Leaving comments, again, you don't need a whole new screen or modal for that, that's just parts of another screen. And then the challenge stuff is, I'll worry about the challenge stuff later, right? We can layer that on. So what you're left with is kind of like, all right, well, I've got myself a couple of modals here, and I've got myself a few other key screens. So if I put my modals, you know, aside for a second, I can then go and start getting my screens and figuring out what I want to see in them. You know, so in this case is of like a register screen, you know, maybe I'll make these in a block underneath, but I can come along and maybe make something like this. You can use tons of different tools for this. And then, you know, I'll just have like my 2 inputs. And sometimes it's really good, especially in group assignments. Like, I don't do this earlier because I don't think it's necessary, and reality is that, you know, there's just a lot to take on. But it's worth talking about now briefly too, just especially for assignment 3, you know, where you might say, you might be working with a team member or something. Now, email and login, you're a smart person, so you probably don't need to go and create a whole second screen just to have like a different register, right? Because you kind of get it, all right, registers like login, except there's just more fields. So, you know, maybe I'll say that this is like register screen plus login screen, same kind of thing. And now I might come along and say, okay, well, I've got my profile over here. It can be another screen. And now I have to start going and like reading through the spec again. So advanced feed, sure. And then other users and profiles. Let a user click on a user's name from a job. Okay, the profile screen should contain any information that the backend provides. So now I come down to the backend and I see, oh, all right, well, there's a lot of information here. Geez. So now I got to think about maybe how I want to lay this out. Sometimes visualizing how you want to lay stuff out beforehand can be really, really powerful, just for your own understanding. And I can see here, well, I've got email, name, image, people watching. Okay, go read the spec again. Profile should also display all the jobs by that person, should show all the users this profile is watched by, should consist of a list of their names as well as a count of how many there are. You can view your own profile, that's easy, you can update things. Okay, so if I'm feeling kind of super lazy, what I might actually do just to start, because remember UI, UX marks are worth very, very little in this assignment. So there's kind of, you know, if I'm a student and I've only got so many hours in the week and, you know, I just prioritize my time, which, you know, most of you should. I'm sure most of you have complex lives with lots going on. Then you might say, well, screw it. Let's just keep this really, really, really simple. What does the API give me? Email, name, and an image, like a profile image. Now, what does it say that we can update? It says we can update all of these things. Well, what I might do is I might have my email be an input and my password be an input, you know, and my name be an input too, or whatever. You know, I'm generalizing some of this. And then my profile image, I might have like new input, and then underneath it, I might actually have the image or something, because, you know, profile image is hard to update because you want to obviously display the profile image. And but to update it, you kind of need to give it like a base 64 string or something like that. And then I might make a note here for myself later that says, you know, if the profile I'm viewing is not my own, then fields are disabled. You know, like that. Put that in little brackets or something. And then obviously I need some kind of submit button too. So I'll make that one a bit longer. Maybe put that note up here or something. Have my update button. I should really say, you know, fields and button. Fields plus update button are disabled. And then, you know, the next part says that it shows all these jobs and stuff. So probably what I would do here, honestly, is I would then go and kind of mock up my feed a little bit here. And typically what I would do if I was doing a feed is I would just do one job, because you kind of get how to, you know, do things many times. So I would just say, you know, even just like put the job there. And then, you know, when you're talking about your profile, you can just reference it. You can just be like, yep. Just be like, this is like, you know, this is like all the jobs. All the jobs for this user. And you'll have to add probably a little bit of extra information too, such as, you know, total watchees or something. Well, whatever. The point here is not so much to do an exhaustive exercise showing you all of this as much as it's to kind of say, if you actually just sit down and try and scope out what you want to do, you'll find a few things. You'll find that you'll spend less time being confused about what to do. Which is good. Sorry, I just got this like very strange looking blister on my arm. And you realize how simple things are in a sense, and the app starts to feel a bit more approachable, because you're like, oh, actually, now that I think about it, this whole thing is just a login register screen, a profile, and a feed, a couple of pop-ups, or a couple of something else. You know, again, ignoring the bonus, the harder marks, but therefore, very quickly, you can start to just expand upon these ideas, and before you know it, you've got the bare bones down. Don't focus on making it look nice. I can't stress that enough to you. I have literally priced those marks ridiculously low. Ridiculously low. To truly encourage you to worry about it last, because there is enough to do for you not to worry about that. So, you know, go build the app, go build it mobile first, make it look ugly, clean up your code as you go, as you learn. And then at the end, you know, maybe try and do the bonus marks and touch on some of the usability or accessibility stuff in the pre-recorded lectures this week. And again, to people who are quite busy, don't worry about the pre-recorded lectures this week, because it's only worth a very small amount of marks. You kind of just got to go into these things and be like, this is my target mark. I want to get an 80, 85 or something. And I'm going to skip out. I'm going to worry about usability, accessibility later. I'm going to worry about, you know, 2.7, the really hard ones later. And I'm going to try and do these two and leave this one out. And that's my like ambition. And let's do that. And that's what I would encourage you all to do, is kind of pick where you want to go. Anyway, let's wrap up. So I just wanted to kind of give you a, you know, encouragement. Go do something like this. It will only take you 20 minutes. And it will really help crystallize everything. Because if you don't have this in front of you, all you'll be thinking about is why your promises don't work. Whereas when you have this in front of you, you think, okay, no, I kind of got this. And you don't have to do it either. It's just some advice. Okay, any last questions before we wrap up? If anyone needs anything, give you 20 seconds to share something. You know, I've got a big screen over here that I put on different colors when I lecture, because it's so big that it like shades my face a different color. So there's red and this is green. And normally it's white, which gives a very like kind of pale doctor's look. But usually I make it yellow so it blends in a bit with anyway, just trying to say stuff till we see any questions, but I'm going to assume we don't have many people here, so let's wrap up. Okay, well, thank you everyone. If you do have any follow-up questions, those here now or those watching later, please post on the forum. Congrats again to those who've really gotten stuck into the assignment. It's great to try hard to stay on top of it, so I'm proud of you all.